Yelling at the men for the mess they've created, he says the suspects have gone completely missing and questions how the detectives just fainted. He asks Jin Chul what happened as he called the ambulance, but he only apologizes, explaining that when he came to his senses, everyone was out cold. The boss tells the men that it hasn't been reported to the higher-ups yet, and he wants them to stay quiet, so the two pigs only got injured while looking into the Gorogu gang. Back in Violent Crimes, Jin Chul works while thinking that something is up when the newbie notices him and asks if he's going to continue investigating the case of the self-surrendering suspects, because Chief just said, but Jin Chul interrupts, saying that he is only checking something in his personal capacity. Looking at the computer, newbie responds that there's quite a lot of criminals that have given themselves up outside of their jurisdiction, and Jin Chul affirms. He adds that the number have dropped a lot between late February and early March though, and asking what's wrong or if something comes to mind, he says it's nothing much, but his aunt used to run a small book rental store, and he was just remembering how his aunt always groaned about how business was bad between late February and early March, because that's the season kids go back to school. He laughs that it's pretty useless information. However, Jin Chul says he'll remember it just in case. This side story continues. A principal says that a problematic student will be attending their school, and the man responds that his father works at a fire station and his mother is a normal housewife. His results are all right, and he doesn't seem too problematic. But being told to look at why he was expelled, the man sees that he left his house for 2 years when he was in the first year of middle school. The principal asks the man if he thinks he'll be able to handle the student, and he responds questioning if he doesn't know why his nickname is Viper, and to leave all problematic students to him, as he'll teach them and make sure they become unproblematic. During a student gathering, Viper yells for students to quiet down when he looks over to see the brat Sung Jin Woo. He thinks that no matter how chaotic of a student he was, he'll tame Jin into a meek lamb. Spotting the gloves that are against the uniform dress code, he begins yelling at Jin Woo, but as Jin turns his gaze, he's shocked to the dark abyss that surrounds him. Swiftly turning around and ordering students to stand properly, Viper wonders if he was seeing things. Bellion appears, and it's made clear that Viper was actually able to see the creatures of the abyss, which makes Jin wonder if this is also one of the effects that he's brought to this world. Later in the classroom, Jin reads a book when a student recognizes him and introduces himself as Younggil, saying they were in the same class during the first grade of middle school. But being pushed out of the way, bullies surround Jin Woo, making fun of him and questioning why he only wears the glove on one hand. Wondering what it is they're doing, the bully asks if his ears are stuffed and questions why he isn't replying. Beru proposes ripping the fools apart and offering them, but Jin doesn't allow it. Now, sliding the glove off, the bullies look in disgust as we learn that this is the one wound he got from the King of Dragons Antares that he couldn't heal properly, but he just asks if they've never seen a burn wound before. Now, claiming they were joking, they tell him to put it back on and walk away. Beru blitzes out, but Jin stops him and thinks that this is good, peaceful. Using his telekinesis on their feet, he trips up the bullies on their way out the doorway. Beru questions this, and Jin says it was just for laughs. Younggil tells Jin that he's become so different from how he was 3 years ago and wasn't even scared of the bullies. Asking if he trained a lot, Jin affirms, and Younggil asks if he's going to join the athletic club, to which Jin notes that that's a club he actually would want to join. This side story continues. On the track and field captain is taken aback by Jin Woo's want to join. Members butt in saying that they've never seen someone say they want to join first, so he must be no joke. Asking if he's a sports talent or ran during middle school, Jin disaffirms. And a member says they only accept sports talents and questions why he's trying to join the track and field club when he's never ran before. To which Jin replies that there's someone he wants to meet in competition. She's still in the junior high division right now, but he's sure she's capable enough to run in the regionals. She was a very competent runner before she gave up on that dream and became a high-ranked hunter, so he'd be able to meet her naturally in a competition where junior high runner gather. Choi accepts under one condition, and pointing out the guy over there as a second-grade substitute runner who's the worst runner in their club, Jin should be at least faster than him to be able to join. Jin knows it's a lie, as the guy might look lean, but he's got muscular thighs and calves which exclude his oozing confidence, but he accepts anyway. Mosshead grins questions, wondering how someone who doesn't even recognize the third-place regionals runner last year joined the club, and Choi adds that since running alone isn't fun, if Jin wins, he can join the club, but if he loses, he'll do laundry and cleaning for a month for free, and Jin accepts. In the teacher's lounge, a woman asks Viper if he's feeling better, and he affirms. Deciding to take a smoke and walking to the window, he notices Jin mogging the club and wonders why the brat is now running on the track with the runners club. He asks the track teacher why Jin is running, and he answers that he heard there was a new student that wanted to join the club. They couldn't chase him away because he proved to be competent after testing, and they're running right now to test his stamina. Viper questions this, and the coach affirms, saying it's already his 20th lap, and he was getting tired of watching, so he came up to the lounge. Questioning his delinquency, Viper thinks that he may have gotten the wrong impression and should observe without bias to resolve the misunderstanding he has of him. Suddenly, his cigarette drops along with his jaw, as he's baffled by the sight, believing it has to be an illusion he's seeing, as there's no way that exists. However, Baru pops in the window and screeches, sending Viper screaming and falling to the ground stiff. Igris disapproves, but Baru just keeks, guessing that Viper really can seem them. This side story continues. In a K barbecue, the newbie confronts Jin Chul about investigating the self-surrendering criminals and asks if he saw something, but Jin Chul plays dumb, asking what day, making the newbie push for it, clarifying the day that suspect who surrendered himself disappeared. This time, our boy says it was an ant monster. He doesn't really know what he saw that day, but it looked like an ant to him. Newbie questions this, wondering if it's like a giant ant he's talking about, but Jin Chul denies this, when a rando butts in, asking if the ant monster had an ant's head but a human's body. Back at school, Choi yells that their goal is to conquer the whole nation. A kid interrupts, asking if their goal wasn't to win the regionals, but Captain says that's too small a goal, and to say again that their goal is to conquer the whole nation. Young-gil fights with the air as Jin asks why he's putting himself through all this hardship just to follow them, and Bellion responds that humans are foolish beings. Now, using his telekinesis to surround Young-gil, he launches ahead of the group as Choi points out his burning passion, questioning how they could remain so lukewarm as seniors. Viper watches in a window with disdain on his face as it's revealed that he was the one asking about the ant monster. He apologizes as he was drunk and tells the detectives to continue their conversation, but Jin Chul tells him to wait a minute and asks for more details surrounding the ant monster. Jin Woo notices that there's quite a few people who are just openly watching him, and Bellion asks if it wouldn't be easier to erase Viper's memories and take away his abilities, but Jin wants to observe for now. Outside the school, Detective Jin Chul stands thinking that the monsters the suspects saw and the monsters of a student that only Viper could see have some sort of connection, even though this is all based on the detective's instincts for now. But how should he ask the student about it? Imagining the conversation, he thinks that it'd be too much of him to expect someone to not treat him as a lunatic when asking those kind of questions. A shadow zips by, and Jin Chul's eyes lock on as he realizes there's really something at this school. Wondering if he saw the guard, Jin acknowledges the former chairman, as even though he no longer has memories of the past, he seems to still have that keen instinct of his. Telling the teacher he has some questions for Jin Woo, the other students are in shock. This side story continues. Out in the hallway, the detective apologizes for the disturbance as Jin thinks that several years have passed since he got lost in the dimensional crack, and he's glad to meet him again, but if he shows him that, he'll probably note Jin Woo's strangeness. Jin Chul thinks that something is different and questions how a student could have such a look in his eyes. Reaching in his pocket, he asks Jin if anything comes to mind when he sees the drawing of a shadow ant, and Jin affirms. Detective Chul asks what the monster is and who Jin is before apologizing for getting a little too excited since he's been chasing information on this for a while. However, Jin only presumes this is a monster that appears in those dramas that kids watch, which embarrasses the detective. Thanking him for his time, Jin asks if that's all, and Jin Chul affirms, saying he already explained the situation to the teacher, so there won't be any problems. Jin says that this is a memorable talk and asks if he could keep the monster drawing, and Beru joins, telling his king not to cast his eyes upon the lousy half-assed script. scribble. Jin Chul gives Jin the drawing and walks away. Igris asks why he didn't tell him, and Jin explains that oblivion is said to be a blessing that gods have given to mankind, even if it was a result made by man using a god's tool. Back in the class, girls ask what that was, and Jin nervously says that he's someone he knows and had some personal questions. The girls continue rambling when the bully suddenly pushes them out of the way, presuming Jin is now some kind of big shot. He asks if fooling around like this would be considered school violence and if he'll report this to the detective. He also questions if Jin wants to fight and tells him to relax his expression as the bully's talking nicely. Suddenly getting grabbed up, Choi asks the bullies what business they have with their lovely track and field ace. They ask why the seniors are here, and Choi answers that they're there to keep their ace from beating the 4 idiots to death. Laughing, he tells Jin they came because he forgot to tell him that there's a welcoming party for newcomers and invites them to it. He asks Choi and Gushik where they're bringing the bullies to, as they speed down the hall wondering if they should go for some light running. Later that day, Choi asks if he wants them to resolve things with the bullies properly, but Jin dismisses it, promising to not let it affect the competition. Suddenly being called, Jin Chul asks if he can have some time to finish what they talked about earlier. He stops, as Choi tells him not to come late, as they'll be holding Young-gil hostage until he comes to the welcoming party. A walk later, Jin says that he won't be able to stay for long because his friend's life is on the line. He asks what he wants to talk about, and Jin Chul calls him Hunter Sung Jin Woo. This side story continues. It was something trivial, but some of the huge happenings that'd make a big mark on history start from things that are trivial. Jin Chul thinks that was a stupid thing to do when he hears a voice asking the association leader if he trusts him. Jin Chul turns his head, but there's nothing there. Standing there, he's suddenly overwhelmed with past memories from a different time and drops to the floor, realizing that those were memories that connected the past, present, and future. He saw himself in the forgotten world through Sung Jin Woo, along with the gates, monsters, hunters, rulers, and monarchs. He recalls his conversation with Jin, asking if he's planning on fighting the monarchs himself, and now back in the present, he asks how long Jin's been fighting against them in the dimensional crack. Jin Chul knows that based on history, he disappeared for 2 years, but that's not something that can be resolved in just 2 years. 27 years, Jin says, shocking Jin Chul. He asks if he regrets it, and Jin disaffirms, explaining that no matter how many times he has to make the decision, he will always make the same one. Detective Wu notes that Jin seems to be enjoying his life quite a bit, to which Jin affirms, except for the fact that he no longer ages and need to keep changing his identity, immortal and unaging. He's already obtained a power similar to that of a god, but despite having such a power, he chose to live as a normal human. He asks what Jin wants to do from now on, and Jin answers that he doesn't have anything planned yet. In that case, he asks Jin to come to the police force, as the vicious criminals that have been coming to the police are talking about dying and say they can't live normal lives because of the shadow monsters. Jin says that if he becomes the police, there won't be any work left for the other police to do though. But Jin Chul says that is the kind of world that he's working so hard for. Jin responds that he'll think about it, and the detective says that he'll be waiting. However, Jin tells him not to wait for him, as he knows that it's a job that involves tons of work but very little salary. This side story continues.